Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how to program your custom buttons and dials for your Fuji X100 series camera. I'm pleased to announce the release of my Capture One and Lightroom presets, Metamorphic Portraits, The Sound of Silver, and Rangefinder. These are all available for purchase at my website. Go to kevindealphotography.com or check out a link in the description below. And now, on to today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, we do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and sometimes we dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. If you're watching this video, you're likely new to the X100 series system, you're curious about getting into the X100 series system, or you've been on the platform for a while and you're procrastinating how to learn to reprogram your buttons and command dials, and you just live with what Fuji gave you by default. But are you actually taking advantage of the power of your camera? Stick around and find out. There are 3 points we are going to cover in today's video. 1, what makes a good ergonomic layout on a camera? 2, how to program the buttons and dials on your X100 series camera. And 3, how I like to program my X100 series camera to set myself up for success with photography. Now, if you aren't on the X100 like I am, you may see slightly different options available on your X100 series model, but the general principles are still the same. And this video isn't meant to be viewed through the context of, well, Kevin told me I needed to program my camera this way, and it's the only way, and it's the best way. That is absolutely not the point I am trying to make in this video. The point is for you to see how I do things, take a step back, evaluate your needs and wants as a photographer, and figure out what makes sense for you. For today's episode, we are going to be living in the menu, setup, buttons and dials, function and command dial settings. So look at the screen, that's where we're gonna live. While it sounds good that I can tell you how I'm gonna set up my camera, I wanna actually do a photo walk around and narrate what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and hopefully that will help you understand how I do things, and then you can take it and apply it to how you do things. But first, let's talk about what makes a great camera layout. I tend to separate a camera's button layouts into 3 categories. My primary functions are functions that are critical to photography, no matter the genre. My secondary buttons are usually specific to the genre I shoot and are commonly used, but not necessarily accessed as much as my primary buttons. Then there are tertiary functions, which are important functions that you want to access every now and then, or maybe they're just secondary functions that spilled over to tertiary because the camera didn't have enough buttons and dials. So let's go on our photo walk and I'll start talking about the primary functions first. Something that may be controversial that I just want to get out of the way, while it's nostalgic to have a stepped dial to adjust your shutter speed, then pop up that same dial and all of a sudden you're adjusting your ISO, this is objectively not the fastest way to control your exposure triangle. There's a faster way to do it on your X100 series camera, and it's more in line with how you would control your exposure triangle on Canon, Sony, Nikon, or even the XH series from Fuji. And I find this method to be more beneficial for spontaneous genres of photography like street. And so my primary control on my X100 is my exposure triangle. But in order to even get this set up in the first place, you have to turn your dials to a certain spot. So you take your shutter speed dial and you turn it until you see the T. Then you pop it up and you turn your ISO until you see a C. Then you move over to your exposure compensation dial and you also turn that until you see a C. Once you do that, you can reassign shutter speed and ISO to your command dials. Great, now that we've established that our command dials are in fact faster than the big dials, let's talk about what I assign them to. My front command dial is assigned to my shutter speed. My rear command dial is assigned to my ISO, and then I use the built-in aperture ring on my lens to control the aperture.
Now, to do this, you need to go to Menu, you need to go to Button Dial Settings, and then you need to go to Command Dial Settings. Here you can reassign that shutter speed. So maybe if you come over from Nikon and you want to have that be aperture or something else, you simply do that here. Now you can assign up to 3 things if you click on that front command dial. However, I don't really recommend you assign more than 2 things to this, because at that point it then becomes a menu. So if I want this to be exposure compensation and ISO all in one, now when I click on this button, it's scrolling between 3 different things, and personally I think that's too much. So I actually go in and I just assign the front to shutter speed, and then I change number 2 and number 3 to none. And that's because I already have my exposure triangle set up. I'm using my front command dial for shutter speed, my rear command dial for ISO, and my lens's built-in aperture ring for aperture. I should also note that I shoot in manual, so I don't actually use exposure compensation at all when I shoot photography. So this is what I use for my primary function settings. Now let's talk about the secondary function settings. In order to do that, you need to scroll over to Setup, Button Dial Setting, Function Setting, and from there you can assign things the way you see fit. Now, as a portrait photographer, I assign this top button to face detection on and off.
Moving over to the front of the camera, this push button on the front actually assigns whatever you want to assign to your control ring assignment. So by default, it's assigned to the digital teleconverter, which is what I use, but you can also assign it to film simulations, white balance, or a standard default option according to the shooting mode that you're in. I just leave it at digital teleconverter. Moving over to the next button, I reassign that to my autofocus area. Autofocus is a huge part of all of my photography, and by just sliding my thumb over, I can toggle between single point, zone, wide tracking, all tracking. Pretty important for the type of photography that I do. Now, we've already established that my rear command dial controls my ISO, but you can actually press it in as well and assign something to that press. So as you can see right here, when I press that button in, it's assigned to my on and off for my ND filter. When you transition from a bright area to a shaded area, it's several stops of light darker. And with a single press of the button, by turning that ND filter on and off, I can go between shade and unshaded areas with a single press of the button and get my exposure pretty close.
Moving on to the quick menu. I actually leave the quick menu alone. I don't reassign it to anything, because when I turn that quick menu on, look at all these options I can get. Some things like my flash function settings, some things like my timer, and you can actually assign what goes into your quick menu. And if you're a minimalist, you can actually whittle it down to as few as, I believe, 4 to 8 functions in here if you don't need all 16. Now, moving to the tertiary areas, you can see in the tertiary areas, you have 4 different swipes you can do. You can swipe up, you can swipe left, you can swipe right, or you can swipe down. So when I swipe up, you can see that I have the histogram come up. So I can easily adjust my exposure. I have a reference to see how over or underexposed I am simply by swiping up on my touchscreen. As I swipe down, that is my custom shooting modes that I can recall, because oftentimes I want to have a base film stock as I shoot. When I swipe to the right, that brings up my white balance, which obviously comes in handy if you want to get things right at the camera. And then when I swipe from the right to the left, that pulls up my film stock, which to me is one of the most important decisions that I can make.
So that rounds out the tertiary functions, but let's explore other parts of the camera where you can further customize and save things, and let's start with the custom shooting modes. To access the custom shooting modes, you scroll up to image quality. I have no idea why you would save custom shooting modes under image quality, but that's what Fuji does, so just roll with it. Scroll down to the 3rd page and go to Edit, Save, Custom Setting. Now, as I arrive there, I see that I've already saved 2, so I'm going to go to the 3rd slot on my camera, and when I select that, you'll see that it's open. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, when we go ahead and select Custom 3, it's going to allow us to rename it. And we're going to rename this guy Street by using the touchscreen on the back of the camera and just spelling out Street. But wait, there's more. There's a fourth area where you can select custom settings, and that is the My menu. And in order to get to the My menu and customize it, you go over to the wrench icon, then you select User Setting. Then you scroll down to the My menu setting, and inside there you can add items. Any items that you see that are blue are able to be assigned to your My menu, and any items that are white with a check mark next to them are already assigned to your My menu. Now let's go explore what's in my menu. In my menu, you can see that I have my select custom setting, my touchscreen mode, another place for my ND filter on off assignment, my flash function settings, my built-in flash, and my subject detection. What would I consider good use of the My menu setting? It's things that I could probably select at the beginning of a session, but not necessarily something I need to access in the middle of a session. Things like my flash function settings or my flash on and off, and even my subject detection. Like, I don't on the fly need to track a train or an automobile. That's something that's usually premeditated. So I have that reside in my menu, and I found that that works out just fine for me. For those of you who are wondering how to reassign your menu OK, your play button, your display back button, and your drive delete button, you cannot reassign those. Fuji has decided that they are too critical and therefore they stay at their default settings. You can apparently also reassign your selector between EVF and OVF, but I personally like it and I use OVF from time to time, especially because there's a picture-in-picture function where you can put your EVF in the lower right corner. So I've never actually reassigned this, but I just wanted to let you know that you can. I don't really know what you have to do in order to get that to work because I never use it myself. So anyway, that is a summary of how I set up my X100 series camera. Once again, my philosophy on it is index finger here, thumb here. That is your shutter speed and ISO. And then because you have an aperture ring built in, you use the aperture ring. And then secondary buttons, obviously this is your control ring assignment. Anything that you can kind of move your thumb over to pretty quickly, I consider that to be secondary. So I make those genre specific. If I'm shooting portraiture or street, I assign these to something that is pretty useful within that genre. And then things I get to less often, but are still somewhat important, I assign to the swipes, the tertiary area. And then anything less than that, I put in the My menu area. And so I find that that in general takes care of about 90–95% of the things that I ever need to access on the camera. So I don't know if that's going to work well for you. Tell me about it in the comments below. Tell me about how you set up your X100 series camera, because this is an open dialogue, the comments section. There are some of you out there who are more experienced than I am with the X100 series cameras, and you may have better ideas than me, and I'm totally down to listen to those. That does it for today's episode. I thank each and every one of you for watching today. If you like what you saw today, tell me about it in the comments below. And if you like this channel, I humbly ask you to click the subscribe button below. And until next time, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.